There we are, even me. Right, good morning. Lovely to see you, lovely to be here. We're continuing our teaching series in Luke, and we're going to be reading from Luke 13. If you want to follow the story on your phones, on a Bible app, that's great. But there are also Bibles at the back of the church if you want to use one of those just to follow the story. And I'm going to be reading from Luke 13, verses 10 to 17. And if you're looking at one of the church Bibles, that's on page 1046. Sorry? Oh, yes, of course. Luke 13, starting at verse 10. Isn't it really tricky when you lose that first bit and then you spend all your time trying to Google where it is that the preacher is? I'm with you. I'm so glad you asked. And Gina has led the way. Anytime you're never quite sure, just ask the question. It is fantastic. So I'm going to read a story that's probably well known to some of us. It's the story of Jesus healing a crippled woman on the Sabbath. So starting at verse 10. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who'd been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leader said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." The Lord answered him, "You hypocrites, don't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or your donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" When he said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. I was at Download recently. Download is a rock festival, and I was volunteering there. Part of my role was to be at the information hub in the main arena. And there were a number of rules around what we could or couldn't do. The refreshments in the hub were for the team only. But when a young woman disclosed to me that she had an eating disorder, and I asked her whether she would cope eating a couple of biscuits, she had biscuits from the hub. I broke the rules giving them to her, but it was the right thing to do in that moment. Another rule that we had was that we weren't allowed to leave the hub. But when a mum of a 15-year-old girl came to us in tears because mum was in too much pain to do the 40-minute round trip she needed to do on foot to get painkillers, and she was too nervous to send her 15-year-old daughter to do that trip for her, one of us walked with the daughter to ensure that mum got what she needed, the pain relief. We broke even more rules responding to that moment, but it was right to break the rules because we needed to meet the need in that moment. Now, don't get me wrong, we need rules. We need rules in place to keep things safe, to keep things ordered. And often rules can offer protection against favoritism or even abuse. But rules can also cripple us. They can place an unnecessary burden on us. And in this story, Jesus reminds us that sometimes We have to set a rule aside to meet the need in the moment. Sometimes we have to exercise grace rather than conform to the rules. Jesus is teaching in the temple and he notices a woman who's been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. And as he sees her, he recognizes her suffering. For 18 years, she has been bent low. For 18 years, she's been unable to lift her head. And he saw the physical discomfort. But more than that, he saw that this infirmity had made this woman invisible. For 18 years, she'd been marginalized. She was a nobody in her community. Due to various first century cultural stigmas around gender, around disability and purity laws, she was an outcast. Her chronic illness or disability would have been wrongly viewed as being a consequence of a sin or a spiritual punishment back then. Her debilitating condition would have made her ritually unclean under the religious law back then. And simply being a woman meant that she had little social or economic or legal standing. As Jesus sees her, he notices her. He knows. He knows what a difficult life she has experienced. A physical, an emotional, a relational, and a spiritual deprivation for 18 years. And in that moment, Jesus prioritizes compassion over conformity. He prioritizes kindness over sticking to the rules. He touches her, and as he does so, he gives her life. But it's the Jewish Sabbath, and no work is permitted. And I think it's so ironic that teaching in the synagogue isn't considered work, but a supernatural healing is work, according to the synagogue leader. It was okay to talk about God's love and goodness and mercy, but exercising it was not okay. And Jesus picks up on this inconsistency by saying it's okay for you to water your animals so they can live, but it's not right to bring new life to this impoverished and crippled woman. And I wonder whether we have something to reflect on here. Where do we exercise an inconsistency in our faith? It's okay to do this, but it's not okay to do that. Where do we experience that kind of cognitive dissonance in our Christian walk? We feel uncomfortable when our actions and beliefs and values contradict each other. Do we find ourselves having to justify this priority over that, or this action or lack of? Could this be, when we experience this discomfort, a work of the Spirit calling us into a new place of integrity, a new integration of works and belief? And don't we want to be consistent people, to be people who walk the talk, as that expression goes? James, in his letter to the church, urges us not to just merely listen to the word and so deceive ourselves, but to do what it says. And the Apostle Paul writes to Titus about hypocritical and false teachers in Crete whose lives contradicted their religious claims. He says they profess to know God, but in their works they deny him. And we don't want to be like that. Now, it's possible that this woman that Jesus heals was suffering from acute arthritis or spondylitis, if that's how we pronounce it, or some other medical condition. And I've certainly heard plenty of sermons that focus on the physical healing aspect of this story, but we mustn't and can't neglect what Jesus actually says, what his diagnosis is. He says she's been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. And he defends his treatment of this woman to the leader of the synagogue, asking, should this woman, a daughter of Abraham, one of our own, in other words, who Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her? And so a really simple question today, and it applies to all of us. Where is Satan keeping us bound? Where is he keeping us bent over in our lives, crippled? This woman spent 18 years looking at the ground. For 18 years, she had a near-sighted perspective. She was unable to look up and see the sky, the horizon, the world beyond where she was next putting her feet. And I wonder whether we might sometimes be bound in this way too, weighed down by the sheer demands of life, bent over by our responsibilities, our pressures, our busyness, crippled by an unhealthy emotional or mental state. Might we be unable to look to heaven because of the circumstances and the challenges around us? And Jesus releases this woman from her spiritual bondage, and then her physical condition is made good. And my question today is, where do we need that touch from Jesus that heals those places, that releases those places where we're caught, trapped, crippled and bent over? Where do we need Jesus's touch so that we might be able to straighten and walk the walk he's called us, to live the life that he's called us to? Where do we need that life restoring touch? I love the little end verse in that reading because it, I think, invites us to another question. As Jesus confronts those who wanted to stick to the rules, we read the people were delighted at all the wonderful things he was doing. They quite liked the fact that Jesus had put them in their place. I think, go for it, Jesus, they might have said. You tell them, you sort them out. And we can be thrilled when we find that that unjust things are made right. And of course, they saw this miraculous change in a woman, and they were thrilled at what they saw. We also are thrilled when we see Jesus breaking in and setting people free. But how, when we're moved at a story we hear, how does that move us? Society invites us to have a very quiet and a very unobtrusive faith, the kind of faith that nobody really notices, the kind of faith that doesn't really upset the status quo. But Jesus calls us to break those cultural driven rules when he says all authority has been given to in heaven and earth has been given to me, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Surely I am with you always to the end of the age. Satan keeps us crippled because he causes us to be afraid, nervous about stepping out in faith, nervous about having that conversation, nervous about declaring who we are and inviting somebody to walk alongside us in our faith journey. Where might fear be crippling you and crippling me? Where might fear be causing us to live a bent over life, unable to imagine God's perspective? Where do we fear so that we're unable to see beyond the immediate today and tomorrow? Where do we fear to imagine what the life for someone could look like if we allowed Jesus to lead conversation and to come into a place or a space and a life where he isn't consciously so already? My challenge is, do we want to be people? Whoa, I'm hoping that's the Holy Spirit blowing through our welcome table. It's causing such a mess. Great. Messy church is a good thing because it says that God is at work, even if it is something natural for the moment. Do we want to be people who just hear God's call but fail to put it into practice? Or do we want to be people who walk that talk? Do we want to be people who agree in principle that stepping out in faith is the right thing to do? Or do we want to be people who long to see others set free because we've defied society's norms and we've put our fear to one side? We've been talking a lot recently about being courageous in sharing our faith. We've talked a lot about praying for people specifically to come to faith. We've talked a lot about being ready to invite those that we live with or we work with or we socialize with to explore a relationship with Jesus. We've talked a lot. And Paul's going to come and share with us a very practical way that we can put that talk into practice, a way that we can walk that talk, a practical way of us being more than simply hearers of the word, but doers of it as well.